I see quite a few people who are also with us this morning, which I am astounded by. But I'm glad to see, especially people who were here this morning, because this is my opportunity to apologize somewhat. I was way too fast this morning in the two classes that I gave. But I'm hoping for this one to be a little bit more, a little slower, a little more clear, hopefully. I also want to give two thank yous, which I did not mention this morning. Number one, to Rabbi Metzger for posting this on Facebook Live as well, and to Daniel Safran for his work designing the source sheet packet that we've been linking to in the chat and that hopefully people are downloading and using. Our topic this evening, Nevuchadnezzar, man, tree, beast. The sponsors for this year are, first of all, Laser and Shana Friedman in memory of Shana's parents, Rav Yechiel Michal ben Harav Eliezer Lipa Zichron Levracha, Umalka Bas Rav Chaim Yoshua Zichron Levracha, as well as for Refuah Shlema for Yisrael Meir ben Sarah Yibad L'chaim. Also, Jay and Dina Goldberg in honor of me. So they write, thank you very much for spreading the light of Torah to our community and beyond. Thank you, and thank you to the Beit Midrash and all the speakers for spreading the light of Torah to our community and beyond. The source packet, if you take a look at page 41, you'll find the sheets that relate to our class about Nevuchadnezzar. I'll note now that I'm going to stop a couple of times to invite questions, but in the event that you don't want to ask a question out loud, but do want a question addressed, if you want to put it in the chat for me, and then I will email you afterwards or answer you afterwards in the chat, that's an option as well. But please don't post things in the chat expecting me to answer them during the session. That's hard with these half-hour sessions. So if you take a look on page 41 of your packet, you will see that, first of all, at the top of the sheet, I gave you a link for more on the book of Daniel. And I put that there because we can't go through all of Daniel. We can't even go through all of chapter 4, which is our main focus in this session. So I'm putting that there so that people who are interested will be able to follow up and hear more classes that I've given on this wonderful, amazing, very hard to understand book. Let's start with Nevuchadnezzar. Who is King Nevuchadnezzar? Tell me, who is Nevuchadnezzar?
Melech Bavel.
King of Babylon. 2 points for David. What else? By the way, people should feel free to turn on their screens. I really like to speak to people, as opposed to speaking to gray squares. So the more the merrier.
Destroyer of the temple.
Destroyer of the temple. Yes, he destroys the first temple. And it's interesting. Maimonides makes the point, I brought it in source number 1 on the sheet, that you might think that you could exonerate him for responsibility for destroying the temple, since after all, God wanted it destroyed. God decreed generations earlier it was going to be destroyed. Maimonides says, no, you don't get an out for that. The same way that the Egyptians don't get an out for punishing or harming the Jews just because God said that this was going to happen, because God does not decree that any particular individual is going to do this, is going to engage in this destruction. It's up to them. So Nebuchadnezzar is king of Babylon, destroyer of the first temple. What else do we know that Nebuchadnezzar did?
Exiled the Jews.
Exiled the Jews as part of it, and in various stages. But he's an incredibly brutal human being. Take a look at source number 2, please, from Malachim Bet, Kings 2. Look what he does to the last king of Judea, Tzidkiyahu. Slaughters the sons of Tzidkiyahu before his eyes, and then blinds Tzidkiyahu so that the last thing he sees is the slaughter of his kids. And then keeps Tzidkiyahu alive, binds him in chains, and brings him to Babylon. That is the character of this man, of Nebuchadnezzar. Not only that, if you want to talk in terms of his religious character, he takes the vessels of the temple and he brings them to Babylon and puts them in storage with his idols, in order to demonstrate that his God has defeated the Jewish God. Not only that, this is somebody who was brutal to his own people. Take a look at source number 3 from the 2nd chapter in Daniel. This is a remarkable story. Shades of this make it into commentary on Pharaoh's dreams as well. Nebuchadnezzar has a terrible, frightening dream. We're going to come back to that dream in a bit. He's so frightened and he is so upset that when he wakes up, he summons all of his advisors. And he says, someone, please explain my dream to me. But don't think he's pleading. Take a look at source number 3 from the 2nd chapter of Daniel. The king declared to the Chaldeans, these advisors of his, the word has gone forth from me. If you don't tell me the dream and its meaning, you shall be torn into pieces and your homes will be turned into ruins. Okay? If you can't tell me what I dreamed and what it meant, your life, your home, brutally. What kind of a person is this? And yet, here we are going to find that God is going to deal with Nebuchadnezzar. He's going to take the opportunity to deal with Nebuchadnezzar. And what God's going to do is to make him ill instead of killing him. And the question is going to be, why? Why not just finish him? Why are you letting this man live? What is this about? And it's a hard question, one that I've thought about for a long time. And I think I might have an approach that's useful. So, background. First 3 chapters in the book of Daniel. First chapter describes how Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are taken as exiles from Israel and trained to stand in the royal court of Nebuchadnezzar. They are given Babylonian names. They are told to eat the food from from Nebuchadnezzar's table, although they refuse. That's the story in chapter 1. They are taught the script of Babylon. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2, you have that dream that we mentioned. Nebuchadnezzar dreams about a great big statue. If you're familiar with Hesiod and his, what was it called? Something of the Ages. Blank of the Ages. It's a similar story. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream in which he sees that there is a great big statue. The head of the statue is gold. And then as you move down the statue, it's made of different materials, silver and then copper and then iron and clay. And then a stone comes out and it smashes the statue. The whole statue collapses. And Nebuchadnezzar doesn't understand what this is about. Finally, Daniel explains what this is about. He says, this is a dream about the future of your kingdom. Your kingdom is the gold at the top of the statue. Eventually, it's going to be replaced by a kingdom that will be represented by silver. That will be replaced by a kingdom represented by copper, which will be replaced by a silver represented by the blend of iron and clay. And of course, all the commentators discuss which kingdoms these are. Is the first one the Babylonians, and then the next one is the Persians, and then the next one is the Greeks, and then the next one is Rome and Yishmael. All sorts of different explanations are actually offered for that. It's not simple and straightforward, but that's chapter 2. And then you get to chapter 3. And in chapter 3, Daniel is out of the picture, but Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm going to create a great big statue entirely of gold. And when the music plays, everybody bows to my statue. And those who don't bow to my statue, thrown in a fiery furnace, right? He's deviated. He's branched out a little bit from the tearing people into pieces. Now he's going to throw them into a fiery furnace instead. And of course, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah will not bow down. And those who are jealous of Daniel and his success turn in Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They're thrown into the fiery furnace and they survive. Which brings us to the end of chapter 3, which presents Nebuchadnezzar's letter. Take a look at source number 4, where I brought you the English translation from the JPS 1917 edition. We're going to go through this translation. Nebuchadnezzar the king, I didn't bother to bring the original Aramaic on the sheet. I felt like this was long enough. Nebuchadnezzar the king, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders that God Most High has wrought toward me. Wow, that's a change of tone. Right? I want to tell the world about the wonders of what God has done. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. His dominion is from generation to generation. This may sound familiar from where? That line? Caught you napping. Tehillim, chapter... Yes, Malchuscha, Malchus kol olamim u'mishaltecha b'chol dar vador. Indeed, it's in Aramaic in the original in Daniel, but it's that line from Tehillim, from Psalms, which we know from Ashrei. So that's his introduction to his letter. Okay, now he tells you the story. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. I saw a dream which made me afraid. Imaginings upon my bed, the visions of my head frightened me. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. So I brought in the whole gang, magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, astrologers. I told them the dream, but they could not explain the dream to me. Notice, this time he told them the dream. He's mellowing a little bit in his old age. But at the last, Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belteshazzar. That was the Babylonian name given to him based on the name of Baal, a Babylonian god, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And I told him the dream. O Belteshazzar, master of the magicians, I know the spirit of the holy gods is in you. No secret causes you trouble. Tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen. Tell me the interpretation thereof. And here's what I saw. Here's the vision. I saw, behold, a tree in the midst of the earth. The height thereof was great. The tree grew. It was strong. The height thereof reached to heaven. The sight thereof to the ends of all the earth. You could see it from everywhere. The leaves thereof were fair. The fruit was great. It had food for all. The beasts of the field had shade under it. The fowl of the heaven dwelt in the branches thereof. All flesh was fed from it. I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, behold, a watcher and a holy one came down from heaven, an angel. He cried aloud and said, hew down the tree, cut off its branches, shake off its leaves, scatter its fruit, let the beasts get away from under it, the fowl from its branches. JPS keeps pluralizing fowl as fowls. I'm pretty sure you don't do that in English. Maybe in 1917 you did. Okay. Nevertheless, leave the stump of its roots in the earth, even in a band of iron and brass, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from man's. Let a beast's heart be given to him. Let 7 times pass over him. The matter is by the decree of the watchers, the angels, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomsoever he will, and sets it up over it to the lowest of men. So again, to make sure that this is somewhat clear as it's going to be without the benefit of psychedelic drugs. What he says to Daniel, the vision that he presents to Daniel, is I had a dream. There was a great big tree. You could see it from everywhere. It provided bounty for everyone. It provided shelter for everyone. And then there was a decree that the tree should be destroyed. Cut it down. Get rid of the branches, the leaves, the fruit. All the animals go away. The fowls all go away. Just leave the stump in the ground. And its heart shall shift from the heart of man to the heart of a beast, for a period of 7 times or 7 seasons. That's the dream. Tell me something. Pausing here. What does the tree represent?
His kingdom.
His kingdom. Whose kingdom?
Nebuchadnezzar's.
Nebuchadnezzar. Who is the tree?
Him.
Yeah. Why in the world can't Nebuchadnezzar's advisors figure this out? It took Leona approximately 4 seconds.
Maybe they wanted their head to stay on top of their body.
Yeah, precisely. They like their head where it is. That's exactly why. Nebuchadnezzar knows, otherwise why would this be a scary dream? Right? The reason why it's scary is because he knows exactly what this dream is about. Well, he says, this dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen, and you, Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation. The wise men of my kingdom can't tell, but you're able. You can do it, Daniel. So.
Name is Yosef.
Yes, well, that's its own discussion, the similarities. But then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was appalled for a while. Ishtomem kesha'achada, which is a phrase the Gemara uses to indicate when somebody is in shock. Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was appalled, and you know why he's appalled. You know why it says his thoughts frighten him, because he knows exactly what he has to tell Nebuchadnezzar. And the king says, no, don't be afraid. Go ahead, speak. So he said, all right. My lord, let the dream be to those who hate you. the interpretation thereof to your adversaries. Parenthetically, the Midrash is very bothered because Daniel has to want this to come true for Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was a brutal, horrible human being, destroyed the temple. Yeah, let it happen to you. So the Midrash actually portrays Daniel turning away from Nebuchadnezzar to God and saying these words, that this should happen to your enemies, meaning the enemies of God. In any case, Daniel says, that tree that you saw that grew with strong height reached the heaven that you could see from anywhere on earth, leaves are fair, and has all that fruit, all that food, all that shelter, and all the fowl and the beasts and all that. Yeah, that would be you. Your greatness has grown and reaches the heavens, your dominion to the end of the earth. And you saw that angel coming down from the heavens and saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, just leave the stump in the ground and let it be wet with the dew of heaven for 7 periods of time. Well, King, bad news. You're going to be driven away from men. You're going to live with the beasts of the field. You're going to eat grass like the oxen do. You're going to be wet with the dew of heaven. 7 periods of time will pass until you know that God rules in the heavens. But the stump stays in the ground because your kingdom will remain. It's going to come back to you after all of this when you recognize God. And here is my recommendation. He says, listen, what you should do is give tzedakah. Help the needy. And maybe that way you'll survive somewhat longer. There's a lot of discussion in the commentaries about why he decided to help Nebuchadnezzar by giving him this advice. It's not for right now, but if you look at the link on the top of the source sheet, you'll see where I've discussed Daniel at greater length. There you'll be able to learn more about that. But that's what Daniel says to him regarding the dream. And sure enough, all this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, for the first 12 months, apparently he's giving tzedakah. 12 months later, he's walking upon the royal palace of Babylon, and he says, what a great kingdom this is. Is not this great Babylon, which I have built for a royal dwelling place by the might of my power, the glory of my majesty? Uh-oh. The word is in the king's mouth, and a voice comes from heaven. That's it. You're done. He's driven out of the palace. He goes to live with the beasts of the field. He eats grass like the oxen. This is exactly what happens to him. His body is wet with the dew of heaven. I'm skipping within the text. Till his hair has grown like eagle's feathers, his nails like bird's claws. And at the end of that period of time, he lifts up his eyes to heaven and he blesses God. And he says, now I understand, and I praise and extol and honor the King of Heaven. That is our story. There is much to be said about all of the different pieces of this dream and its fulfillment, but again, beyond the scope. But tell me something, just out of curiosity. This goes back a little bit to Rabbi Yaris's shir earlier. What exactly do you think happened to Nebuchadnezzar that he ended up wandering around outside and letting his hair and nails grow, and he doesn't talk to people and all of that?
Either went crazy or there was a coup.
So it's really interesting. Don Isaac Abarbanel, in his commentary on Daniel, Ma'anei Yeshua, quotes the Christian commentators, and he says some Jewish commentators who believed that Nebuchadnezzar was actually transformed into an animal. And he says, come on, that doesn't make any sense. Then how does he recognize God in the end? And how come no one took over his government? Why wasn't there a coup? And by the way, he says, the text says that they have long nails, that he grows his nails long. Oxen don't grow their nails. So he says it's not a physical transformation. And in source number 5, I show you that Don Isaac Abarbanel says, in truth, miraculously, suddenly, extraordinary quantities of black bile overcame him. What is black bile a reference to? If you're writing when Abarbanel is in the end of the 15th century, or really any time from the 4th century before the Common Era until pretty much the 18th century, Depression. The theory of the 4 humors. Go all the way back to Hippocrates and Galen, and then work your way forward. The idea that black bile represents some element of depression. That's what Don Isaac Abarbanel refers to here, saying that he therefore rejected human society and fled from it, dwelling in the wilderness, rejecting royal food and palaces, sofas of gold and silver. He elected to travel alone all day and all night, estranged in the fields, to the point that his radiance and appearance darkened, his hair and nails grew very long, his food was the grass of the field as the food of beasts, and his solitary wanderers in the wilderness eat. His heart, which had once been wise, was changed from the heart of human beings through his illness and the growth of darkness in him. His heart and thoughts were not those of people, certainly not those of a king. His heart was like that of a beast in him, drawn to his desires without any concern for intellectual or pragmatic thought. I'm obviously not giving him a formal diagnosis here, but he seems to be describing a depression combined with some element of something, some sort of psychosis. But again, this isn't a class on psychology, and I defer to the experts. But Abarbanel, as well as Ibn Ezra before him, go in that direction as they read this story. So Nebuchadnezzar sends out a letter to his kingdom to let everybody know about this after he's back. Why does he send out a letter? Why would you send out a letter? To tell everybody what happened to you?
No other way of communicating.
Sorry, what, Ralph?
Ahasuerus did the same.
I can't hear you.
Ahasuerus did the same.
Achashverosh sent out a letter? Not a letter about God.
No.
Why would he send out a letter saying God is great? So Abarbanel offers you two explanations, a religious one and a pragmatic one. He says, on the one hand, perhaps this was an element of tshuva, an element of atonement for the arrogance that he had displayed earlier, which we're going to come back to. That's his first approach. I brought it for you in source number 6. Alternatively, he says, this is pragmatic. He's letting everybody know, yes, I was gone, but despite any rumors that you heard, I'm back. So don't think you're going to pull any stunts in my kingdom. I was here all along. I'm good. And any attempt to thwart my plans, like any attempt to thwart the divine plan, is going to be foiled. So that's our story. Okay, this is easier than the first two that I did this morning. So I'm able to breathe a little bit as I speak, and hopefully it's a little easier to follow. It's a straightforward story at the end of the day, right? You have a king, this brutal, horrible person, who is essentially gaining his comeuppance because he is chased out, he loses some element of his sanity, wanders out in the forests for a while until he comes to recognize God, and then he comes back and sends a letter telling everybody, what his summer vacation was like. But the big question that you have to ask here is the question we asked in the beginning, which is, this man is awful. Destroyer of the temple, brutal massacrer of people, an exiler of people, captured very well in what he did with Tzidkiyahu, killing his sons before his eyes and then blinding him. Captured very well in the text in Daniel chapter 2, in which he says, if my advisors can't tell me what I dreamed and what it means, I'm going to tear them into small pieces and destroy their homes. Why is he still alive? Like, why don't you just kill him? What in the world is this? So I'll show you 3 approaches, and then I'll give you a 4th idea. Approach number 1, Don Isaac, all of the first 3 approaches are from Abarbanel. I love Abarbanel's commentary to Daniel. And they reflect other ideas that are seen elsewhere as well. It's not just Abarbanel. I just realized I haven't posted the link in the chat for a while for the source sheet, so I'm going to do it again now. But in source number 7, I showed you that Abarbanel first argues what happens to Nebuchadnezzar is measure for measure. He says human beings are situated in the middle of the ladder. There are celestial beings on top, there are human beings in the middle, and there are beasts down below. Nebuchadnezzar said he would ascend and be like the celestial beings, and therefore God lowers him to be on the bottom. He had acted like a beast. Now he is treated like a beast. He exiled others. Now he is exiled from his palace. Not a bad idea. But still, he should be dead. I don't understand. Second approach, compartmentalization. This isn't about his destruction of the temple. This isn't about his exile of the Jews. This is about what happened in chapter 2 and chapter 3. In chapter 2, he was told, your kingdom is going to fall apart. God is going to set up a new kingdom that is going to demolish all of the empires that precede it. When Mashiach comes, as represented by the stone in the dream, he's going to knock down that entire statue of all of these empires. And Nebuchadnezzar's response to that was chapter 3. He said, you think that's what's going to happen? I'm going to set up a statue all of gold, and we're going to play music. And when the music plays, then everybody bows to the statue. It's a coronation. Babylon will reign forever. That's what he tried to do in chapter 3. To which this is a response to him saying, you're an arrogant man, Nebuchadnezzar. You think that you can defy God? You just watch. And he is now torn down in order to learn this lesson. That's the idea in source number 8. And Abarbanel adds to that saying, you think that you are like this gold statue? Meaning, made of metal, durable, able to last for a very long time? Nah, you're like a tree. Trees have a cycle. They grow, and then they deteriorate. The city of Toronto comes and paints a red R on them, and eventually they come cut them down. That's the way it works when you're a tree. Nebuchadnezzar, you think you're forever. You're not forever. But in other words, this isn't about the destruction of the temple. It's just about the arrogance of chapters 2 and 3. Could be. Could be. I still think he deserves death. And then a third approach from Don Isaac Abarbanel as well. And that is, this is about practicality. Why? Number one, because, and this is Abarbanel in source number 10. Number one, because God wants Babylon and then Persia to have a 70-year period of exile of the Jews. The Jews are supposed to be in exile for 70 years. If he gets rid of Nebuchadnezzar early, the Jews come out of exile early. That's number one. And number two, because Nebuchadnezzar is going to write this neat letter that's going to sanctify God's name. So God has a motive for keeping him alive. He has a job to do. I still have trouble with that. He still should be dead. So here I'm going to suggest in the final 3 minutes my idea, which is, go back to the tree image. And I would like to do this as question and answer, but it ain't going to happen in the time that we have. I apologize. God shows Nebuchadnezzar something that is meant to look like himself to him. Nebuchadnezzar has to recognize himself in the dream. He has to say, look at that, that's me. And the image God chooses to represent Nebuchadnezzar is not a brutal king slashing and hacking and destroying and conquering. The image that God uses for Nebuchadnezzar, in which Nebuchadnezzar will recognize himself, is an all-providing, benevolent tree. Nebuchadnezzar thinks of himself as a provider. He thinks of himself as a benevolent king. I give food, I give defense, I give shelter. And that fits his comments about Babylon. Look at this wonderful city, this wonderful empire that I built, in which everybody is able to have whatever they want. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't see himself as we see him. He thinks that he's a protector and a provider. And that is what he is most proud of. His throne, his power, his ability to provide. And what God does to him is to take that away. And it gives us a remarkable insight into illness as a whole. When we talked about Chizkiyahu this morning, we talked about how illness involves loss of control. I gave you one of the sources from this morning on the sheet as well in source number 11, but we won't read it out right now. Illness involves not only loss of control, it involves loss of the ability to provide for others. Loss of the ability to do on behalf of the people around us. It takes away the option in many ways of helping others. And therefore, there is a death aspect to it for someone who always saw himself and defined himself as the great provider, as the great protector. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar is dying here. He dies because he loses that which he valued most about himself. And then God recreates him. But now he's not a provider anymore. Now he's a conduit. He's a tool of the divine will. like the practical benefits that Abarbanel mentioned, the letter he's going to send out and so on. And he's not the first to go through this. Paro was the first to go through this. Paro was the same way. Paro thought of himself as the provider for Egypt. What happens to Paro at the sea, at Yamsuf? His entire army is toast. His country has been trashed. And then the Midrash says in source number 12, Pharaoh is left alive to be the one to carry the message to everybody else about what God has done. That's why he is alive at this point. He has been transformed. He's essentially born again, to borrow from a phrase from somewhere. He's no longer Nevuchadnezzar, provider, conqueror, protector. Now, conduit of God's will. That's what I see going on here. Accept it or don't accept it, but I want to make sure we come away with this takeaway lesson, and then I'll turn over the floor. The lesson to me is about helping people who are ill. Because Nebuchadnezzar in his situation is forced to see himself as a beneficiary of divine aid, as a recipient of aid. That's what happens to people when they're ill. They have to be takers, and they don't want to be takers. Sometimes people do, but it can be painful emotionally, be painful for people's pride. And so I think it's really, really important that we find ways where appropriate, when appropriate, to help people who are ill to also engage in chesed, to also be able to help other people. Whether that means by offering them, and it has to be appropriate for their situation, but offering them the opportunity to talk with nieces and nephews and grandchildren, maybe finding the way for them to talk to other people in their unit if they're in a hospital or a long-term care facility in a way that they can feel that they're productive in a relationship. Maybe it's reading to people by phone. This is a longer discussion, obviously. But the point is, be sensitive to the fact that somebody who is ill has had certain aspects of their personality taken away from them, and help them where they want it to be able to recover that. Not Nebuchadnezzar, he's done. But normal good people. That's what we're talking about here. There's much more to be said. There are review questions at the end of the sheet. Email me if things were unclear, please, because I have already overstepped by a minute. I'm turning over the floor to Rabbi Bergman to take over. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.